exercise and a couple of questions out of this exercise, and you turn them into your own exercise, but maybe parts of them are word for word taken out of that workbook. Is that a copyright infringement?
Well, just hold that thought and we'll see.
Okay.
We'll go through the 4 factors and we'll sort of, you have to look at all 4 factors to make that determination. So like I said, the more creative it is, the less likely it's going to work. The amount and substantiality of the portion used. Now that's fairly obvious. Now there's no magic formula. Now you hear people say, well, you can't take more than 20% and this and that, and that's all based upon, and I'll get to that in a minute. After the 1976 law came out, was adopted, education groups got together and said, we need to come up with guidelines on what fair use is. And so some of these guidelines that were created, in fact, we might as well, how do I get back to the, just hit it? There we go. Here are the agreements right here. There are agreements. Oops, what is that?
You're on highlighter.
What do I do there?
Click the black cursor.
That right there? Still didn't go.
Patience, it's going.
It is?
And your little hand up there, Steve.
Oh. I'll do it the old-fashioned way.
It's going.
Maybe the web's slow today, as usual, right? Well, yeah, I guess it is trying to go. What do you expect? Anyway, there are guidelines for photocopying of things for classroom use. There are guidelines that were enacted by all these education groups for use of music. There are guidelines that if you at some point go to that website, there we go. What cannot be displayed. That's real good. That's interesting. Have some percentages and all those sort of things, and that's where sort of the old wives' tale. I shouldn't use that's not correct to say that. All these there are these urban legends, urban myths out there about percentages. You know, forget stupid percentages. They have no force of law. They mean nothing. Okay, but a lot of, in fact, I know AAUP refused to sign off on those guidelines back in the 70s or early 80s, saying that they were too restrictive. And in fact, I think educators probably shot themselves in the foot by sort of wanting these guidelines, but it does sort of give you some wiggle room. But what's happened in several lawsuits that have been sued that have come about, sometimes courts have in fact taken those guidelines as what fair use really is, when it's probably much broader, could be very much broader. It's actually each case is a case-by-case basis. But a couple of cases, in fact, this famous case in New York where NYU got sued for pursuing course packs and all those sorts of things. In fact, part of the settlement was that NYU agreed to, in fact, abide specifically by those copying guidelines that were enacted there. And so anyway, you see I mean, there's nothing wrong with those guidelines, I suppose. I mean, if you stay within those, you're probably okay, but you can probably go farther than that. So anyway, so that's where the whole thing with percentages go from. And just because you may be able to use all of something, I mean, just because you use 100% doesn't mean you're not going to. That doesn't mean it's not fair use. That's just a factor. And also, what part if you use the heart, the real heart of something, you may only use just a few paragraphs, but that's really the nitty-gritty of the entire work. That probably would weigh against you. Classic example of that was Nation magazine. After Gerald Ford left office, he wrote his memoirs, and he had exclusive deal, or his publisher, I think it was Random House or whatever, had his exclusive deal with the Nation magazine to publish the first the first excerpts or whatever of this book. And before that happened, somebody got a hold, particularly the big thing was why he pardoned Nixon. I mean, that was the hot item, and so they published that before, and so they sued. And the court basically said, look, this is the heart of the whole, this is what everybody wanted to know. And so you have taken, although they only sort of excerpted 3 pages or 5 pages out of 500 pages, that's what everybody really wanted, and therefore you violated, that was not fair use, you violated copyright law. So it always depends on what is it you take, can play a major role there, okay? And also, if you, I think from an educational standpoint, if what you take is very relevant to your educational goal, going back to factor 1, plays a role there too. So if so in other words, quite often all of these sort of come together, they sort of link together, because if it's an educational use, then what you want to use are certain things that really can be, are good classroom, for classroom discussion or whatever, so that can play a role.
Okay, so somebody sends me an examination copy of a textbook on using the internet for journalists, and I want to only have 1 chapter out of that. Can I copy that chapter and give it to 16 students? 16 copies? Can I copy that chapter and put it on reserve at the library? Does it make any difference?
Well, once again, hold that thought. Well, so you have 2 examples here,
I know.
so we can look at that. And then the final factor is the effect of the copying on the market for value of the work. And some people would argue that's the most important, and it may very well be. In other words, if there's a, I always tell people, if there's a real, if you can buy this in the market, then you better not just copy it and use it in the classroom, because even nowadays there's a much bigger market, educational market for things. So just because you argue it's for education, if there is a place you can buy this and you, instead of buying it, you just photocopy it and use it, then you're going to have some real problem when it comes to part form. So you look at all the facts and circumstances and determine whether or not, what kind of effect it has. If the book's out of print, there's no way to get it, then it has no effect at all. So I mean, those all weigh. Okay, let's go back to your example. So what was your first example?
Pulling some examples out of a workbook and putting them into a new exercise.
Okay. So factor 1 is it's for educational use. Yes. So you would that's a check mark for educational use. The second, the nature of the work itself. Well, it wasn't creative. It was factual about grammar and so forth. So that probably would weigh in your favor. The amount used,
Just a couple of sentences.
couple of sentences, that probably would weigh in your favor. Fourth, did you do this a substitute? Did it compete with? And so 4 is probably the one that could get you in trouble, depending on, if you did this instead of buying the book, or you did this and then now your book is going to compete with that book, then you may have some problems.
Well, this is just for use in the classroom.
Okay,
I'm just making a handout for the students to do some exercises.
Okay, and so that, if in fact, no magic formula, but at some point you use so much that you probably should have bought the book, had the students buy it. I mean, there's no hard, fast rules there. So.